Okay today?
Yeah, everything is good, and we're up and running, and this Hangout is live and on air, and out of error, but on air. So a little bit of a play on words there. You know, Shakespeare was very smitten with that sort of humor, and he said puns are the highest form of humor. He was definitely a master at punning, but anyway, clever use of words gets us into trouble more often than not. And that's the whole theme that Charlie and I are going to be looking at today. How are you this morning, Charlie?
I'm doing just beautifully. Thank you very much.
And have you had any of those conundrums show up in the last week or so where the words are very obviously just twice removed, if not further removed from truth or reality? Because it seems like it's the time for that is upon us. I'm seeing a lot of that as we observe the news around us and observe what's going on within society in general.
Yes, yeah, I would say I've seen it in my interaction when I'm coming from fear rather than love. The same word can be, interpreted two different ways, or the same uh, perception. I guess the perception can be seen differently if you're coming from fear or love. And so I've had some conversations about stuff going on in the world that I have to be cautious of, and in the sense that I want to be sure going in that I'm going in with Holy Spirit, going in with coming from love rather than from any form of separation, and which of course will lead to attack rather than just a simple expression of love. So that's been present for me this week, to be aware of that, to be on top of it.
Yeah, it's insidious how the ego is so what's the word for it? Aggressive, and always looking for opportunities to
Yeah,
get us into trouble.
yeah,
Um,
and subtle, subtly doing it.
it can
Subtle
be,
aggression.
yeah. I've also noticed though that it has its blatant cycles too,
Oh
where
yeah.
you're screaming hysterically at the guy who cut you off in traffic, and then that moment of sobriety comes around, and you're going, "What the hell am I doing?"
There I go again.
There you go.
Hmm.
That leads us into that idea of what is strength, and attack is always coming from the direction of weakness, because the only reason we would attack is because we fear that something could happen to us. Chapter 3, section 4, error in the ego, it says the abilities you now possess are only shadows of your real strength. So when we imagine ourselves in our truth, we become invulnerable, and we can walk into the lion's den. We can do that walk of fire and not worry about it. It says all your present functions are divided and open to question and doubt. And that really is, the biggest problem I think with most people is indecision. We're always in doubt of whatever we've decided to do. There's also that fear to take this first step. It says this is because you are not certain how you will use them and are therefore incapable of knowledge. The difference between knowledge and perception. You are also incapable of knowledge because you can still perceive lovelessly. Perception did not exist until the separation introduced degrees, aspects, and intervals. Spirit has no levels, and all conflict arises from the concept of levels. So we're really given a very clear vision here
Yes.
early on in the course, in chapter 3, as to what it is that motivates us, what it is that causes us confusion and fear, and ultimately what it is that causes us to create an experience of self-defeat. Because if you're completely focused on the ego's litany is strive, 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 but don't achieve.
I love that line. Spirit has no levels. You know, there are no levels in oneness, no levels in heaven. It's just that. It's just oneness. God is, and that, you know, the experience of that is knowledge. You know, it's such a wonderful word that Jesus uses throughout the course. The word knowledge, really to describe the oneness. In that knowing, there is no separation. There is just the experience of the oneness. And so anytime that I find myself thinking of the other, or recognizing a body, or knowing that there's you know, I was thinking about it this morning. The other word that he uses so frequently is situation. Anytime there's a situation, it's just assuring me that I've got duality going on. And in that duality, of course, I'm choosing the opposite. Well, there is no opposite to oneness, but I'm choosing duality instead of truth, instead of oneness. And that's always such a clear picture for me, like you just said. You know, right here at the very beginning of the course, he's being very clear. There's one way to see things. There's one way to experience things. One way to know things, and everything else is perception. And it's perception from that place of duality. So it's very cool, very, very cool.
Exactly. And, you know, the Italians, they have this idea called dialettica rhetorica, which is just, you know, words that go round and round and round, and you're just like a dog chasing its tail, and you're using words to compound situations in your life. You're not simplifying things. You're thinking about things and adding layer after layer after layer of obscurification to the real question that's at hand. And the question is always, you know, it reduces down to the idea of separation. Are you separate and apart from God, or are you fully and totally immersed in God? You know, like the drop in the ocean, realizing that you are both, that you are the drop and you are the ocean, and able to seamlessly and effortlessly experience life on every level without all this interior dialogue and debate and self-defeating words that turn us into victims of our own intentions.
Yeah, reminds me, Chris, of the great line out of the course. You know, God is, and then speak. You know, there's nothing else to say. We don't need more words. We just need to experience at that point. God is. The knowledge of that. Yeah, very true. You know, there's, and again, that reference to levels. You know, when we talk about different levels, we can use words to try to define levels of spirituality, levels of growth. You know, and they're all really just part of the illusion, because there are no levels in heaven. It's just oneness. So I, you know, need to be cautious of that too. You know, when I'm in conversations and we are discussing, you know, different levels of somehow we sanctify the levels by making them spiritual. You know, and in truth, God is, and we don't need to say anything more.
Very true. Absolutely. And, you know, we go down to the fifth section in the chapter that we're looking at, and it says, perception always involves some misuse of mind because it brings the mind into areas of uncertainty. The mind is very active. When it chooses to be separated, it chooses to perceive. So that reduces, you know, this world to that realm of nothingness that it actually is. Until then, it wills only to know. So in our natural state, knowledge is our sense of security. Knowledge is our validation of our very existence on every level. It says afterwards, it can only choose ambiguously. So once you've tasted the wine, you kind of like are always going back for another cup and another cup.
Yeah.
That's where we have to start to exercise discipline, you know, and it all reduces down to the idea of discipline. And the only way out of ambiguity is clear perception. The mind returns to its proper function only when it wills to know. And that, you know, that hinges on that idea of willingness. and recognition that our will is the most potent part of the puzzle here. We can will ourselves to awaken, or we can just flounder around and allow the ego to shape our will and misdirect it, so that we're constantly under attack, so that we're constantly suffering. Says this places it in the service of spirit, where perception is changed. So we have to go through that tunnel of perception in order to finally arrive at the place where we're beginning to get a glimpse of knowledge, to get a glimpse of, you know, the truth about where we came from and who we actually are.
Right. It leads me to recognize, you know, that third lesson of the Holy Spirit. Always be vigilant for God and his kingdom. You know, this is the choice that we get to make on a regular basis. And this, where you're reading right now, you know, the next line goes, the mind chooses to divide itself when it chooses to make its own levels. And I was just speaking of levels a second ago. But in truth, we can't truly separate ourselves. We are the Son of God. We are in oneness with our Father. And this concept, this idea that we can choose something different, is the meaningless thought process that we go through. You know, and as you were touching on earlier, we use a gazillion words to justify it, and yet it is all meaningless. It's just an illusion. So it's just such a wonderful blessing over and over again. I recognize that this idea of this places the mind, right? Places the mind in the service of spirit. That's all we really, really want to try to focus on here is, what is going to bring me back to peace? What is going to bring me this? What is going to let me experience this knowledge? Choosing it, just choosing it over and over and over again. So when I feel that somebody used the term the red flag the other day, when the red flag goes up and the waters are getting choppy, that's your warning sign. You started listening to the wrong teacher, and you've got an option. You've got a choice. You can go back, in a sense, you can go back and make that choice again and choose Holy Spirit and listen to that teacher.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties, is that we do have real options. And the things that we have done, the ideas that we've entertained, are not set in concrete. We can always change our mind. And that's, the beauty of the way the whole thing works.
Yeah.
And at this point, looking at the dialogue we've had so far, I think it's interesting that the Course gives us a clear definition of our truth in being, in that we are given the understanding that we have a mind, but we are not our mind. In other words, the mind is a component of who we truly are, but it is not the totality of who we are. So, that leads us to the next level of realization as to who we actually are. If we are not our mind, if we are not our thoughts, then there must be a part of us that is observing all of this, that is not identified with the mind. It's simply observing the mind. And I think that's one of the levels of distinction that comes up very clearly in the Course, whereas some of the other disciplines, some of the other groups, like Christian Science and Science of Mind, and a lot of the other themes that are teaching enlightenment, they get kind of muddy. They don't make that clear distinction that we have a mind, but we are not our mind. Our mind is a part of us. And I think that's a very revealing idea once you start to explore it, because then you're no longer a victim of your own mind.
Yeah. That's really, we are the mind of God, which is the most fascinating part of this, right? That's who we truly are. We are the mind of God, and we've been left that memory. That memory is inside all of us, is what the Course is teaching us. So we do have the memory of who we truly are inside of us. And that's the memory that we want to go to. That's the teacher that we want to go to inside all of us to get the clarification that you're talking about here. Start to understand we are not our bodies. We are not the mind that we think we are that's running the show here on the earth. We are the mind of God. That's who we truly are a piece of, that mind. That is,
Yeah, and that idea that we live and dwell and have our being in God, and we are eternally, held in perfection. But again, I guess you could say that the mind of God is what we would envision as being heaven.
yeah.
And within that, our existence is eternally in heaven. So you can't get out of heaven. There's no exit from heaven, as it were.
Such a wonderful thing. Yeah, I was just looking a little further down below where you were reading before, right? There's a line down here in paragraph 7, Jesus speaking in the first person. I was a man who remembered spirit and its knowledge, which is kind of what we're saying. That's that awakening to the fact that it's all a dream. The knowledge of the fact that we are the Son of God is what he awakened to, right? He remembered it. He remembered spirit, remembered his oneness, and that is knowledge. That experience of that is the knowledge. It's really just fantastic.
Well, and there are no ambiguities when you really start getting into these deeper ways of perceiving what's going on around you, which again, we have to use perception to eventually arrive at that plateau, which is the resting place of knowledge. But along the way, it's like that journey to Damascus, and we're out there with our ego attacking people, crucifying Christians, as the disciple Paul was very well known for when he was Saul of Tarsus. He was a man who had blood all over both of his hands and his forehead too. And then on the road to Damascus, something happened. He got struck by lightning, and all of a sudden that realization of who he actually was appears to have occurred to him. And within that, he was blinded for 3 days, if I remember the story correctly. And that really is how awakening works in a lot of ways. We are blinded by the realization of truth. And it takes us a while to reorient ourselves, to get out of, that state of being overwhelmed when these revelations and when these epiphanies fall upon us. So it is a very exciting journey, and it does have a lot of very dramatic and climatic experiences that it offers us. But those things are the things that make the journey so thrilling for us.
Yeah. We talked briefly before we came on air about the synchronicity of events, and the recognition. For me, it always kind of takes me back to this idea of oneness. There's just really one of us here going through this, and the synchronicity just kind of reinforces that for me. When I open up a course page and get on a conversation with you or somebody else, and they're talking about the same subject I just read about, or I get on a phone call and the two people, myself and the other person, going through the same thing, having the same experiences. It's just such a clear picture to me that there's just one of us here going through this together. And that wonderful line in the course that says you teach what you need to learn. There's all of this opportunity to recognize that every sharing that's going on, every bit of communion that's taking place, when we are in that place of oneness, we are serving spirit. There's only one conversation we can really have, right? And it's the one that leads us back home. It's the one that helps us wake up. It is the light that's shining on all of us simultaneously. So it's an incredible experience. And I used to get so blown away by the serendipity things. It was just like, oh my God, I get so carried away now. Now it's more of a subtle understanding of, yeah, how else could it be? You know, this is the way it's supposed to be. We're in communion. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it definitely leads us back to an acceptance of the unified Christ, the unified self. And the other thing I like playing around with occasionally as I'm entertaining ideas about this life is the idea of deja vu, you know, and everybody's always surprised by it and that sort of thing. But deja vu is the most natural thing in the world because all of this is a dream. It has already happened. It is already over, and we're just having a recall experience. You know, we're like Arnold Schwarzenegger in that Mars adventure where he experiences total recall. And that's one of the things I find fascinating about how it shows up all around us in so many different ways. That movie and that story really has a lot of parallels with A Course in Miracles because we are recalling our lives, but they're not our real lives. It's a phony life. It's an illusion of a life that we really never were able to fully participate in simply because we could never get outside of God. And that is our redemption.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is, and it's. I too often think of even in the deja vu things. You know, if we look for the lesson that's there, as opposed to just the wow factor. Wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, and the answers come through very very lucidly for us if we allow them to. You know, it's like, well, turn left here and turn right there, and you know, then you'll experience whatever it is that you're about to experience, and you'll understand it instead of just being blindsided by it.
Right.
So, well, it was a delightful discussion this morning. I know you've got to get rolling. You've got your group today.
Yes, I do, and I just wanted to end it with this one sentence that I touched with on you at the beginning. You know, I'm over in chapter 22 doing some studying this morning, and there's just two sentences here. But be you rather grateful that you could be the means to serve his end. This is the only service that leads to freedom. And those two lines jumped out of the page. I couldn't take my eyes off the word grateful this morning. When I read that sentence, I just kept staring at the word. It was like, oh, yes, you know, and I'm just so grateful for this life as it is, and the experiences that I'm having, and the blessings that are here for us.
Yes, absolutely. Gratitude is the only attitude that we should indulge.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely. It was great chatting with you. Next week, Barret will be rejoining us. He's down in Florida right now.
Yeah.
Having fun and games on the beach while we're still watching snowfall come and go. And,
yeah, it'll be good to see him next week.
Yes. Well, you have a great day and a great week. And
you too. It'll be good to see you next week as well.
Yes.
You have a great week.
Reconvene and share our pontifications.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much.
You bet. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.